Hello, everyone, as you are joining us. My name is Lynn Walsh. I'm the Assistant Director at Trusting News, also a member of SPJ's Ethics Committee and a former National President for SPJ and former Ethics Chair for SPJ. Happy Ethics Week. We are glad you are here. I'm going to let people still join. We still have people clicking in, which is great. Um, and I'll probably repeat this a couple times as I have people join us, but please do use the chat. It is open to you, and we would love to see you add if you want to say hello right now, who you are, where you are. And then also, if you have questions throughout, please feel free to use the chat for that. I will leave questions for the end to have some questions and discussion around ethics and journalist use of AI. But for the first part, I will be sharing some slides, but then we should have about 30 minutes or so for questions and discussion. So hopefully if you have those questions, be ready, feel free to share them. And we still have some people joining, so I'll wait just maybe another minute or two. And again, if you want to use the chat to say hello, hello, Kristen, greetings from Miami. Yes, please feel free to say hello in the chat. Hi, Joyce, coming from Maryland. Oh, Chris here from Alabama. Taylor's here from Seattle. Hi, Taylor. See some people I know and some people I don't. That's great. Oh, yay, everyone's saying hello. Thank you. That makes it. Oh, hi, Chris from San Diego. Me too. I'm based here in San Diego as well. Okay, I don't see others. The number is kind of plateaued, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, please use that chat. We'd love to see your questions, engage with you that way. We have Kim here from SPJ, and she is going to be paying attention to the chat while I am leading the presentation, but she will definitely, I've told her to interrupt me if there's any kind of pertinent questions, but then I also will leave questions, time for questions at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, happy Ethics Week, everyone. I'm glad you are here with us. My name is Lynn Walsh. I am currently the assistant director at Trusting News. I'm going to talk to you a lot about what we're doing there, and that's where this work around how to build trust with your use of AI and be transparent, that work comes from my work with Trusting News. I'm also, though, I'm past former ethics chair for SPJ, former national president for SPJ, and I'm currently on the ethics committee. So ethics is near and dear to my heart, and it's actually what got me started working on this project for Trusting News. How this all started actually was a couple years ago, I guess it's been 2 years ago, there was some research that came out that said when journalists disclose their use of AI, it decreases trust in their news content and in the newsroom as a whole. I don't know if you remember seeing that, but I know that caught my eye. I instantly read the research, reached out to the researcher, and I was like, I think I know, or I want to experiment more with why maybe people are saying that they distrust the content more after seeing a disclosure and after seeing transparency around the use of AI. And so that's why now I'm currently working with that researcher to find out, can we as journalists disclose our use of AI, be transparent about our use of AI, and not lose trust and potentially build trust? That's kind of the premise of why I got started working on this. And the reason why is because when that research came out, we sort of saw the industry react and say, well, we can't disclose. We can't disclose the use of AI. If we do, we're going to lose more trust, and we can't afford to do that. And when I heard that, I just thought, the ethics code, SPJ's ethics code, we should disclose. We should be transparent about this, and let's find a way to do it responsibly and not lose trust. So I'm going to share some of that with you today, and then also hear some of your questions. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so really quickly, we do have just some data for you on what we know at Trusting News about what people think about news, their trust in news, and also their overall trust in AI. And really quickly, what we do at Trusting News is we are trying to help journalists rebuild trust with their communities. How we do that is we look at research that's been done, we do our own research about why people distrust news, what is causing them to turn away from news. We then come up with possible solutions to those problems and those reasons that people say that they distrust in news, and we test them with newsrooms. And so we're constantly doing this. Here's an idea, let's test it in newsrooms and let's see if it's working to rebuild trust. And primarily, the solutions that we have come up with are based on if you are transparent about what you do, you can engage and listen, and you have some humility, we know you can rebuild trust. I'm going to talk a lot about that today, specifically the transparency and the engagement. So first and foremost, some data. What do people think of news? Well, we know that trust in news is low. This differs depending on how old someone is and their likelihood to trust in news, their political affiliation. We know that people who identify as Republicans trust news less than people who identify as Democrats. Independents also recently have been showing decreases in trust in news as well. Primarily, we know that when people don't understand how journalism operates, they make an assumption about what we do or what we don't do. Generally, that assumption is negative. They are not giving us the benefit of the doubt. What this means is that they don't understand that we fact check, that we know who an anonymous source is. There are all these elements of what we do that they don't understand. They are making an assumption. Most of the time, that assumption is negative and incorrect. And so there's a huge disconnect between what we think we do as journalists, the offer we provide, which I'm sure all of you here, you are trying to help your communities. You think of journalism as a public service. We are trying to provide information that they have a right to here in the US specifically. So if they have a right to this information, they're too busy to necessarily get it on their own. We provide that for them. That's why I got into journalism. I know that's something that's kind of a tenet and a principle of providing this information. But the public doesn't always see it that way. They see journalists as part of the elite. They see journalists as maybe not being like them, not covering content that relates to them, not understanding them. And a lot of times that reason is because most people have never spoken to a journalist. And unfortunately, journalists don't often reflect the communities that they serve. All of this can lead to distrust. This is a very quick kind of summary of research and trust. If you want to dig deeper into it, we have lots of resources on that, and I'm glad to answer any questions on that. But one of the biggest takeaways is that our good intentions, what we are trying to do as journalists, they do not lead to automatic trust anymore. Just publishing a story that is accurate, that is fair, that is ethical is sometimes not good enough to build trust. We have to have these elements of transparency added in. We have to be willing to engage with our communities if we want to build trust and not continue to lose it. Biggest takeaway, if you want to kind of understand where mistrust in journalism comes from, is this mistrust often is about a misassumption. Remember, not giving us the benefit of the doubt for the work that we do, not understanding the process. So they fill that information void with something they've maybe heard from a politician, from a friend, from a family member. Most of the time, that is probably going to be something that is negative about how journalists do their jobs. So at Trusting News, we don't like to live in the problem. We like to try to come up with solutions. And so what we do is we set, as I said, we have these kind of 3 principles or these foundational strategies that we focus on. Those are transparency, engagement and listening, and this idea of humility. So we know that when you are transparent about what your goals are, what your values are, the fact that you have ethics, the fact that you fact check, those are things that can build trust. We also know that engagement and listening can build trust. And I'm going to talk a lot about those two today. The other thing we know, though, is that if we have empathy for the news consumer experience, it is frustrating to get information. It's frustrating and hard to determine what's correct, what to trust, what not to trust. Is this real? Is this fake? We should have empathy for that experience. We also should have humility that we don't have all the answers. we have a limited amount of information that we're able to get and then share. We should be talking more about that. We should be willing to have more conversations and get feedback from our communities about how we can improve and things they want to see more of or covered in a different way. We have a lot of resources on that humility aspect as well. But again, I will be focusing on how can we, with your use of AI, build upon these foundational strategies of how to build trust, of transparency and engagement, things we know work to build trust. How can we apply that to our use of AI in our news? So a lot of the strategies and the work that I'm going to be sharing with you, the recommendations, come from a cohort of newsrooms that we worked with last year. We worked with 10 newsrooms. Here they are. We had national and international newsrooms like the Associated Press, USA Today. We had local TV stations, KXAN. We had smaller organizations. And we worked with them to do this first element of this engagement, this idea of engagement and listening. How can we figure out what our audiences expect and want from us when we use AI? So we recruited these 10 newsrooms, and what we did is we created a survey for them to ask their audience questions about what they think about AI. How comfortable are they when journalists use AI? Do they want transparency around AI? We also created a consumer interview guide where they interviewed 10 news consumers and dug a little deeper into these questions. And so we focused on these two things, a survey and the community interview guide, because we really do believe, and our research has shown, that journalists make more informed decisions about what it means to serve the public if they understand the people they aim to serve. So it's this idea of we can better build trust, relationships, and better be a public service if we are involving our community in that process and understanding who they are. The other reason we wanted to do this is we know that people don't know journalists. Very few have spoken to journalists. And that leads to this disconnect of people thinking that journalists aren't like them. So why would I consume their content? They don't know me. They don't know my issues. They don't know my concerns. So no, I don't trust when they're talking about how this law is going to impact me because they don't know me, or they've mischaracterized me before, or mischaracterized someone like me before. And this data came from Pew, and they've asked this question now twice in the last 10 years. And the question is, have you ever spoken with a journalist? And unfortunately, the number of people who responded in this particular survey who say that they've ever spoken with or been interviewed by a local journalist is just at 21%. The likelihood of someone speaking with a journalist or being interviewed by a journalist goes down. So that number goes down from 21%. The less white they are, the younger they are, the less education they have, and the less money they make. And so what this shows is that even the people we are talking to, which is a small percentage of our communities, tend to represent a lot of similarities. And so we see that our lack of getting out of that bubble can sometimes lead to the distrust that we have. So that's why, those are the reasons why we wanted to start with these surveys and talking with the audience. If we want to use AI in our journalism, and I think there are really good reasons why we should and how we can use it. But if we want to do that, what does our audience think about that? We need to know that before we can really dive into using these tools on kind of a grand scale. Another reason why we wanted to do this first is that we've done this with other topics, whether it's reaching communities of color, whether it is reaching young people, it is reaching conservatives, people who politically identify as Republicans or conservative. When we have brought newsrooms together before and done surveys like this to just get people's thoughts on how to better cover things they care about or better understand who they are, we have seen that people appreciate being asked these questions. When we had newsrooms use a community interview guide to try to reach conservatives or people who lean right politically, we found that 86% of those people that were interviewed by their local journalist said that they felt a sense of trust building with the journalist and or the news organization after the conversation. Also, 28%, almost a third, said that they were considering subscribing. That's huge. So we know this type of work pays off. So we had them deploy the survey, which I'm going to share with you. We had them deploy the interview guide. And here's what we learned. Overall, most people are comfortable with AI use when it is something like checking spelling grammar, transcribing interviews, language translation. Those are things that, and we had over 6,000 actual news consumers. So the news consumers of those news organizations. So people in Texas, people in Ohio, people throughout the country who responded to the survey. Over 6,000 of them said, we're pretty comfortable with if journalists use AI to check spelling and grammar, transcribe interviews, use it for language translation. Where they get more uncomfortable is data analysis. And when you talk about using AI as like a newscaster or an avatar, and when we're talking about writing content or helping journalists write content. A couple things I want to point out that's interesting about this is there's been lots of research on what are news consumers comfortable with, not comfortable with. Our data, the 6,000 responses we got, are very similar to what other international surveys have shown and national US-based surveys have shown. But these news consumers actually were less comfortable overall with almost every use case that we're talking about. So what that kind of showed us is that it's really important to be talking to your audience about what their comfort level is with this. And you will also see data analysis continues in other surveys that have been done after this and in work that we continue to do. People tend to be uncomfortable with journalists using AI to help with data analysis. I point this out because I think it's actually a pretty good use case for what AI can help with. I also think it's something that journalists will use AI to do. So how can we talk to people more about our use of AI in this way so that they feel comfortable with it? Now, you may be thinking, why do we care if they're comfortable with it or not? Well, if they're uncomfortable with our use of AI in these ways, that means they probably are going to be less likely to trust the overall product. If you work really hard on an investigation, you sit here and you fact check and you do all of these things to make sure it's accurate, it's fair, and it's ethical. We don't want them then distrusting all of it or totally dismissing it because of that use of AI. So how can we, if we're using these tools, make sure it doesn't contribute to them not trusting the information, not believing what we're putting out? The other interesting thing that I will point out is that when we talk about writing content, overall, people are not super comfortable with journalists using AI to help them write headlines or help them write stories. What we do see, though, is that the comfort level does go up if there is human review involved. I will talk more about that. So that's how we found with the survey, like how comfortable are you with the use of AI? We also asked a question about education. Do you want to know more about AI in general? Do you want to know more about how AI is being used around you, about how AI is being used in our newsroom? We found that people are very, very interested in education around AI in general, and specifically how we're using it in newsrooms. More than 80% of those 6,000 people said that it would be helpful if a newsroom provided information and tips to better understand AI in general and detect when AI was used in content creation. When we talk about building trust, when we talk about journalism ethics, I think this is a huge, huge opportunity for journalists right now and our newsrooms to think about, wow, our community is telling us that they need support in this area right now. I think this is a void that we can fill and we can be seen as being useful and helpful. And we are very interested at Trusting News in helping journalists and newsrooms think about how can we better educate our community about this and be someone that they turn to in these moments. The biggest takeaway from the survey, though, 94% of people said they want journalists to disclose their use of AI. So I shared in the beginning, the reason I kind of started down this path of wanting to know more about this was because a couple of years ago, there was data that came out that said when journalists at this particular news organization disclosed that they were using AI, it decreased trust in the content. That's kind of the big takeaway. When the industry heard that, there was lots of, oh no, should we disclose? Should we not disclose? And I was like, from an ethical standpoint, I think we have to disclose. So how can we do it in a way that's not going to result in us losing trust? That's what we want to explore. And we started out by just asking, do you want journalists to disclose? 94% of people said yes, they want you to disclose your use of AI. We dug into that a little bit deeper, and we found that not only do people want the use of AI disclosed, they also, though, want to know. They said that knowing why the journalist decided to use AI would be important. So a disclosure that just says AI was used in the story, basically not enough. That's what we're hearing. That's not something that's going to help people trust your content and or help them understand what you did. They want to know a little bit more information. They said they want to know why journalists decided to use AI. They also said they want to understand how journalists will still be ethical and accurate, even though they are using AI. They also said that knowing that a human was involved and reviewed the content before it was published would be very important. That goes back to that comfort level of, are you comfortable if journalists use AI to write headlines without human review or with human review? We saw people were much more comfortable with that human review. This reflects that as well. So when these results came out, we thought, okay, it's clear people want disclosure. How can we translate this to help newsrooms disclose in a way that is going to build trust? So we went back to research that we've been doing about how to be transparent, why to be transparent. And we're basically applying what we know from being transparent about using an anonymous source, fact checking, interviewing people, sources, all of that stuff. And we're now going to apply that to the use of AI. And why are we doing that? Well, we know when journalists are transparent, it can build trust. This is just one example of research we have done where we have helped newsrooms talk about their ethics, their fact checking, how they work to be accurate, their goals, and their mission. And so we help them be transparent about those things, answer those questions in something called an explain your process box, maybe also called a nerd box, a transparency box. There are lots of different names for it. But the idea is that if a journalist answers questions about the use of an anonymous source, what their goals for the story are, who they interviewed, how they work to be fair, we found that those are things that can build trust. So what we did in this experiment in particular, we did some A/B testing. So news consumers saw a story that had a box like this explain your process box, transparency box. Then we had people who saw the story without the box. What we found is that people who saw the story with that transparency box, with that explain your process box, they were more likely to say that that newsroom and that news content had a better reputation, was more informative, was more trusted, was more credible, had more integrity, was more fair, was more transparent, was more reliable, more accurate, more unbiased, and more likely to tell the whole story. So we know that this works. We also have done research that we have taken transparency language, we've added it on air to radio and to television stories. And we also found through research and focus groups that works to build trust. If you are currently working in TV or audio or video and you want links to that research, message me and I can put that in the chat. I also will try to, when I get to question and answer, put that in the chat. But that's good news. Transparency works. So how do we fit those best practices, those research-backed strategies, and apply that to how to disclose your use of AI? So we looked at the research, we looked at the surveys, and what we found and what we are recommending is that AI disclosures should include the following: information about what the tool did, an explanation about why AI was used. Ideally, in that explanation, the language should show how AI benefits the community or improves news coverage. Also, talking about human involvement is key. Were humans involved? If so, you should say that. And very, very important, an explanation about how your content is still ethical, accurate, and meets your newsroom's editorial standards. So you may be thinking, how do you put all of this into a story disclosure? We're now talking about paragraphs of text. The answer is no, we are not. You can do this with just a couple sentences. And so what we have done is we have created a fill in the blank, Mad Lib style disclosure language that you can please copy and paste and use, where we are actually currently testing this language with newsrooms, and we will have results in early summer. But the idea is getting all of this information into a disclosure at the top of a story is not only possible, but it's doable, and it doesn't take that much writing. It's not going to take up that much space. And so how you're going to do that is you would say something like, in this story we used, add in what you used to help you do what? When we use this, how did you make sure it was still accurate? Was there a human involved? And you using this allowed you to do what? More in-depth coverage, provide content on more platforms, etc. So what does that look like in kind of real life? We have sample language in a trust kit, which I'm going to share a link with you, where you can literally copy and paste this. I also have like almost 100 different versions of how this could be said. I think the great thing about this, what we're learning, is that there are so many different ways to include all of this information in just a couple sentences. So this is kind of a starting point to help you disclose your use of AI. We picked 4 main areas where we see that newsrooms are primarily using AI right now. So transcribing interviews, analyzing data and records, writing content, and then translating content. And so, for example, an idea of how, if you are currently using AI to transcribe interviews, saying, in this story, we used artificial intelligence to transcribe the audio from our interviews with sources. We reviewed all quotes for accuracy by listening to the original audio of the interviews before including them in the story. Using AI made the reporting process more efficient, giving us more time to fact check the story for accuracy and fairness. An example of how, if you're using AI for analyzing data or records or an investigative reporting. In this investigative story, we used artificial intelligence to assist in the analysis of the public records received from the state. The reporters fact-checked the information used in the story by re-reviewing the public records by hand. Requesting public records to get beyond the he said, she said is an important part of our reporting process, and AI allowed us to do this more quickly. I'll go over these 2 examples, and then I'll talk about some other things we've learned with some research, and then be opening it up kind of for questions and thoughts on this. If you are using AI to help you write content, this is an example of maybe some of these examples are things we know newsrooms are currently doing, so we tried to write the descriptions accordingly. So here's an example. Based on news articles we previously published, we used artificial intelligence to help draft the content of this newsletter. Our editorial team carefully reviewed and edited the AI-generated text to ensure it aligns with our standards for accuracy. Using AI allows us to convert our news coverage into different formats, reaching you where you like to consume information. Let's say you're using AI for translation. You could say something like this. In this story, our original news coverage was translated into multiple languages with the help of artificial intelligence. our team carefully reviewed and edited the translation to ensure it accurately conveys the intended meaning and maintains the quality of our reporting. Utilizing AI for translation allowed us to quickly share our stories with a broader audience. After we did that research with those newsrooms, we have done some other research, specifically digging into language. I think when I've been working with newsrooms on this, I get lots of questions about what words I should be using. Should I use the term AI? Should I use generative AI? Well, what if this isn't actually AI and it's more of something else? How do I describe that? Do they still want to know? A couple takeaways we learned when we did this research, where we basically took hundreds of versions of these disclosures and we wrote different versions of how this could be, use different language. Instead of using artificial intelligence, sometimes just used AI, sometimes said tech tool, sometimes said technology. And we basically had people rank which ones they preferred or preferred more over the other. What we found from that research is that audiences do tend to respond better to detailed disclosures about how AI is being used in the newsroom. So what that means is that a generic disclosure of your use of AI that just says at the bottom of a story, let's say, AI was used in this story. That is the type of disclosure that was ranked as the least favored. People do not like that disclosure. They think that it seems based on the research that they prefer more information than that. We also learned that the word choice we decide to use, so saying our journalist reviewed this, our editor reviewed this, our reporter reviewed this, that specificity of which word matters more, saying journalist, saying editor, saying reporter, that doesn't seem to sway news consumers either way. We also learned that when it comes to getting specific about AI's role, it's better to focus on how it improves news quality or quality of overall experience for the community over quantity. So we found that if you just said this allowed us to do more, that wasn't ranked as favorably compared to saying something like, it allowed us to create more news coverage into different formats, reaching you where you like to consume information. So when you provide that benefit, yes, it allowed you to do more, but do more of what and for who? More content, different platforms for the consumer. That is the type of language that was ranked more favorably. We also learned, again, from this pilot research, we still saw that people are more comfortable with AI being used for transcription and translation, and there still was a lot of discomfort for data analysis. There's a lot more to be done there, and we want to explore, but I think it's really important for us to think about that because, again, we're seeing newsrooms use it for this use case. I also think it's a pretty good use case for how AI can help us. But how can we get people more comfortable with that use case so they trust the content afterward? We also found that does using AI versus automatic tool versus saying artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, does that make any difference? And we really saw that that did not make a lot of difference when people were ranking which type of disclosure they prefer. So all of this is still ongoing. And what we are now currently doing is we're taking that research and we're building on it. And we have 10 more newsrooms. In the US, we have 2 newsrooms in Brazil, and we have Swiss Info in Switzerland, who are now taking our Mad Lib recommendation, that language, and they're actually attaching it to stories where they are using AI. And we are surveying those audiences who see that disclosure to find out, what did you think about this disclosure? Did it make you trust in the news content less, more, have no impact? These journalists are using AI to do translations. They are using it to help them put together newsletters. They're using it to help them create podcasts. They're using it for story summaries. So lots of different use cases. We also are hopefully going to learn more about the placement of these disclosures. If the disclosure is at the top, do more people notice it more, prefer it compared to the bottom. We have newsrooms experimenting with adding a little icon after where they use AI, where you click on the icon and then the disclosure about AI use comes up. We have actual newsrooms playing with an actual pop-up that invites people to learn more about how they use AI and then take the survey. So those newsrooms are currently doing that. We're really excited about that because this is going to be real newsroom content by real newsrooms with their real news consumers. So it's kind of, we're exploring this and going to learn more out in the wild. Now, when you look at all of this, I think I want to say a couple things before I open it up for questions. We get a lot of questions, and I would say some pushback about, are you saying we have to disclose all the time, every single time we use AI? What about Grammarly? What about spell check? And what I say to that is, that's where it's really important to talk to your audience. I think these recommendations potentially will change depending on how much we are using AI, how comfortable communities are with the use of AI. And maybe it gets to a point where we're using it so much that we're actually not having to disclose the use of AI, but we're actually disclosing when we aren't using AI. I don't know. I think where we will go with this is going to be a learning process, and the recommendations are going to change. What I know right now and what I feel confident with, if you're trying to be responsible and ethical in your reporting, it is clear to me that people are saying, please let us know if you're using AI. And they're also saying, help us better understand this. So I look at this as, why not? We know transparency can help build trust. Let's explain to them how we are doing this. And it really isn't that hard. Now, when I talk to journalists and they're like, okay, I think we're going to use AI, what should we do? First and foremost, get on the record about your AI use. That could be a simple FAQ page on your website. You can write a simple article about how you're using AI, how you're not using AI. Pointer has a great guide that can kind of walk you through creating an AI policy, but please don't get bogged down in making it this perfect policy because of how AI is going to change and our use is going to change. This really should be kind of a page on your website or something that you are updating and changing as you change your use case of it. Talk about how it is an experiment, how you are experimenting, and like, what is your commitment to your audience as you experiment? Will you be transparent? Will you correct mistakes? All of these things, there are different questions you can answer, but don't get bogged down in it being this policy that never changes. It's okay to answer a couple questions on your website, add to them, change your answer as time goes on. The other thing is, I really think it is important to talk to your audience. When we did those surveys with newsrooms, we did find differences depending on who the newsroom serves versus a local audience, regional differences, national audience differences. That's where I think having a good pulse of what does your audience expect, what would they find helpful, can really, I think, be an opportunity for us to build trust and maybe rebuild trust in some cases. I also will say, I definitely think we should be disclosing our use of AI. If you are using Grammarly or kind of you're using a tool regularly all the time, put that on a page where you talk about your use of AI. Then not every story maybe needs to have this disclosure, but it's there and it's public so that people know. You're not trying to hide anything. Another thing, and I'm hoping this kind of spurs some questions as I open it up. I was recently at an event in New York that was sponsored by Pointer and the Associated Press. And the last day we went through these ethical scenarios involving AI. And the one thing that I found myself as I was looking at the ethical scenarios, I found myself, I just kept coming back to, we have strong ethical principles. For me personally, I use SPJ's Code of Ethics. That's my bias there. It's the one I'm most familiar with. But I found myself, you just keep going back to those 4 tenets and think, well, okay, how can I make sure to still be accurate? How can I make sure to minimize harm? All of those questions apply even as we are talking about AI. And so I'd be curious if you are thinking about how you are using AI. I think a lot of people want, and I get questions about, well, we need an AI ethics code, or we need a code to guide us about how to be ethical with our use of AI. And I find myself continuing to come back to the basic principles we have, and we can apply them to this new situation we're facing. But I want to be curious if others think that is the case, or if you think there is something that could be helpful to help guide journalists in this moment of how to be ethical with their use of AI. And before I open it up for questions, I just want to say all of this information, including the survey, which you can copy and you can use, including the community interview guide, that Mad Lib language. We have a trust kit for you that you can use all of it for free. It is there for you. And then also, if you want to stay up to date on just what we're learning around this topic, we have a weekly newsletter that comes out, and that's where we share updates. You also can feel free to reach out to me at any time. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions. And Kim, I don't know if there's anything in the chat. If not, I'm glad to have anyone like raise their hand or put something in the chat and hear what people think. I guess specifically, I'm curious if anyone's thoughts on kind of that last question of, again, I hear often, can you help me, can you help guide me on how to use AI ethically? And again, I come back to, I think that the principles in a code like SPJs really can help guide that in any way. But I'm curious if anyone wants other specifics or if anything else would be helpful there. And Chris, I see you have a question. I wonder about the ethics of using AI to help research history features, which are popular with readers but not hard to do. So, and Chris, I don't know if you, sorry, I'm not sure if you can unmute with this format or not. If you can, I'd love to hear you. If not, I can try to. Kim, can they unmute or no? Oh, can't unmute. Okay, sorry, Chris. Okay, so I think what you're saying is, and here I'll just take San Diego since we're both here in San Diego. Maybe if they want to know um, the history of, I live here in Ocean Beach, we have a long pier that is here. They want to know the history of this pier. And right now it's shut down, it needs to be rebuilt. So like, could AI help me research the history of this feature that's here in the community and potentially might be rebuilt? I think yes, it definitely could be used to do that. I actually think that could be a potentially good use case for it. Um, I think you could totally do that in an ethical way. I think the key, though, that I would say is first and foremost, if you kind of walk through SPJ's code, is you want to make sure anything that you are sharing publicly is accurate. So you're fact checking everything, right? Also giving credit to where it came from or where the information came from. So seeing if you can kind of cite this to make sure that it's getting that proper credit. And then I would definitely disclose like how AI helped you do that research, and then what did human journalists do as part of that? So they fact checked, they went out and interviewed sources. We created this timeline to help you better understand it. I don't know if that helps, Chris, but I think absolutely you could use AI in an ethical way to do that. A question from Brendan, how would you source that article according to ChatGPT? So this would be, I think this would be the question of like, what tool are you using, right, to help you find the information? And, you know, when we talk about the ethical principles of the tools we use, I think it is really important that we should probably be taking basic journalism ethics and applying it to this question of, should we use this tool to start with, right? So, like, maybe you say and tell your journalists, look, you can use it for research, but we want to make sure that we're using a tool that is citing information. There are AI research tools that can cite the information. Maybe we only use those tools because we can track where the information is coming from. Um, Because if you just use a tool that doesn't do that, it's much harder to figure out, is this true, is it not? And then who do you give credit to? Um, and then how would you source that article? I guess as far as like, I would try to give it. So if ChatGPT gives you a link to a story where that has information, let's just say again about the OB peer, I would cite the actual link that ChatGPT provides. Then in your disclosure, say that you had ChatGPT help you gather information on this topic. That's how I would do it. And I'd be glad to kind of brainstorm or write something there, but I think it is doable. Melissa here, I think journalists are the perfect people to use AI. As you mentioned, we already operate from an ethical standpoint, not trusting anything on first glance, confirming information and sources before reporting. Yeah, Melissa, that goes back to kind of as I've been thinking about this. I think, right now I'm really trying to help the industry better understand how we can be transparent about our use of AI. But then there is this element of the education. And I think first and foremost, we can help set an example of how to ethically use AI and what that can look like, right? And I don't know that we always did that in other cases as far as use of social media, the use of the web, right? Um, Now's our chance to do that. We can model that behavior that we want to see and be transparent about that and explain it. And also use it as a differentiation about how we are doing things. And I also, if people have ideas on educating the community, I think there's so much potential there. Um, we really would love to see newsrooms explore this idea and help newsrooms explore this idea. Um, let's see. Here's okay, someone did a Q&A in the Q&A thing. It says, what about using AI to help develop questions for a live interview, such as moderating a panel discussion? Should a disclosure be made? So this goes back, I guess. So first and foremost, I will say personally, I am someone who likes to be more transparent than less transparent. I also know based on research, being transparent can help you seem um, more human. It kind of makes you seem like you can be more of like a real person. And so I would say in this case, if you used AI to help develop questions for a live interview, you're moderating a panel discussion, why not disclose it? I guess I don't see the harm in disclosing it. I think it potentially the harm is that people might think, well, you were lazy or you didn't take the time or take this seriously enough. You're not enough of an expert. But I think if you explain it in a way that, I wanted to make sure um, I was covering all the issues that might be out there. I know what I know about this topic, but is there anything I'm missing? It's almost like if you've heard anyone say, I spoke with different groups to see what questions they might be curious about. It's another way of doing it. I don't think that technology and AI should totally replace that asking real people that question, but I think it can be a supplement and maybe part of what you do. So if you were to go out and ask people, what questions do you have as we interview the mayor, right? You could also involve AI in that too. So you're doing both. That's just kind of giving you multiple perspectives. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. I just still see that one in the Q&A. I will put a link to the slides that I used here in the chat. And please feel free if you are experimenting with this or have language that you want to use as you disclose AI, please feel free to send me a note. I'm always glad to review it, make suggestions. And I'd also be curious if you've done any engagement or educational things around AI, because we really want to experiment with that next and see how we can use that to build trust. Um, oh, Kristen has a question. What are your favorite AI tools? I will say I'm pretty basic in that really ChatGPT is the one that I use the most. And some of I actually did just use some of Canva's AI capabilities to help me create an invite for my sister's baby shower and an invite for my son's birthday coming up. So those are the two tools I use mainly. With ChatGPT, I will say I don't use it a lot for work. I've used it a couple times at Trusting News, and we actually have some disclosures that are out there. Personally, I use it for things like I went to the physical therapist and they gave me some recommendations, and I was curious if there was anything else that would be recommended just to get some more exercises. And I put in the note summary, and it gave me a lot more exercises. I've used it to like help me plan a trip, um, and also come up with a theme for my sister's baby shower. So some personal use cases where it made it a little bit easier when my brain was kind of fried and I was looking for a little more creativity than I had in the moment. But I know if you are curious about AI tools, I'm just going to give a shout out to um, the AI toolbox that Mike Riley runs. He has a really great website and breaks down um, the different tools that come out, how they would be useful to journalists, and also has some how-to videos. So I'm going to put a link in here. There are a lot of cool use cases that journalists are using it for. Um, I some of them I find internationally. There's actually one of the newsrooms that's a part of our cohort right now, one of the Brazilian newsrooms. They are using AI to help them code data so that they can they created a calculator about President Trump's tariffs and what that impact would be, and they used AI to help them do that. They also used AI to help them in Brazil. There were potential changes coming to, I think, taxes. And so they created another calculator based on what would change, and help people could then use the calculator to see how it would impact them. I think those kinds of things are really cool. How newsrooms are using it. They have disclosures on that. And please feel free, anyone else, if you have favorite tools you're using. Um, yes, Anastasia gives a shout out to Jeremy Kaplan's Substack on AI tools. That is a really good, if you are curious to, what I like about Jeremy Kaplan's is it's not just like if you're not currently in a newsroom, there are lots of things he shares that could be useful just in your everyday life. It's called Wonder Tools. And let me see if I can find a link. Here we go. So like if you just want help to kind of better get through your emails or things like that, he kind of goes through tools that are not just applicable to newsroom content or newsroom use cases, if you will. Sorry, my computer's running slow, but let me put this link in the chat here for you. Oh, and Taylor, yes, Perplexity for research. Oh, and Gina's saying she's not seeing any of the links. Okay. Are other people seeing the links? But back to Taylor's point. Oh, you're not. Oh, I see, because I didn't put it to everyone. Hold on one second. Let me go back and paste this. Okay. So journalist toolbox. This is going to everyone. So this is the tools from Mike Riley. Sorry about that. Thank you, Anastasia, for the Wonder tools. Let me go back and put a link to the slides. That is my fault. Sorry. Here, a link to the slides. Here also is my email. And then, sorry, back to Taylor, to your point about Perplexity. I have not personally used it that much, but I do know that a lot of journalists and a lot of creators actually do use it for research. So that is also a cool tool that I know I've heard a lot of people say good things about. Thank you for mentioning that, Taylor. And let's see if there's any. Okay, no more Q&A. I think you should see the links now. Sorry about that. Were there any other links I put in? I don't think so. Okay, yes, you're seeing them. Great. We have just 5 minutes left. Please, if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I just really appreciate all of you being here. I also am open to hearing if anyone has thoughts or ideas on what would be helpful to help guide journalists as they are trying to be ethical with their use of AI. Again, I get that question a lot, and I have found that really I turn to SBJ's Code of Ethics, and I do. I think the content is there to help guide the discussion and help you make a decision. But if you are a journalist who are facing these situations and you're like, I wish there was something more, what do you wish was there? I would really love to hear it because I would love to hear if there's something like we can create at SPJ or we can create at Trusting News to help you guide and make those decisions and make sure you're still being ethical. Brendan says some people in newsrooms are hesitant to use tools that could replace them, calendar editors, for one example. Brendan, that's interesting. With the cohort of newsrooms, we had the survey, right? That had the 6,000 responses, but then they also had the community interview guide that we did. And one surprising takeaway, actually, that was here, and I'm going to put the AI toolkit that has all of these links. So if you want to use that survey, you want to see the Mad Lib language, and you want to use the community interview guide, it's there. But something that came out of those community interview guides that was a little surprising, but has also come out of other research, people actually say they are concerned that journalists' use of AI will lead to job loss in the industry. I kind of laugh at that a little bit because I've actually never talked to anyone who has ever said they're concerned about journalists losing their jobs, because it's happening quite often and more often now, it seems. But it is a takeaway. That is something that people, the public, said they are concerned about. Ideally, this is not something that leads to job loss or leads to us replacing people in the newsroom with technology. That is not kind of an ethical use case or a good use case. We already don't have enough people in newsrooms to cover the communities that need us. So I think as a company, as you are thinking about these tools, where I've seen success is where companies think about and are on the record about how they will use it, what they won't do, that they will not use AI to replace people. This is going to be something that enhances coverage, frees us up to maybe it takes over those tasks that are just kind of annoying or can be replaced, but then it allows us to talk to more people, do the actual reporting. So I think I've seen a lot of success with companies who approach it that way, who say that, have a commitment to that. And I really hope as an industry, that is our commitment. I do think, unfortunately, you will probably see some job loss from this, and that's very disappointing. And I hope as an industry, we can stand up and say, let's not do that. Let's use this to enhance coverage. Melissa says, I've written hundreds, if not thousands, of anchor and package scripts. I would not have AI write a script, but I think using it to summarize your human script to write a reporter tag or headline is probably okay and great on deadline. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of idea of if you've already created the content, like I do not think AI is at a point, like as we think about copy editors and even replacing reporters, it is just not there. It cannot. Remember, AI is only basing what its recommendations are on things that previously existed, not new information. If it writes anything that's new, it's making it up, right? So it can't replace reporters. It can't replace what we do. But I do think a good use case is if you already have something potentially written, can it help you be a little quicker with maybe writing that social post or something like that? One thing I will say from an ethical standpoint, you want to make sure you research what happens when you put your content into the tech tool itself. Because in most cases, once you do that, you no longer control what happens to it. It now can be part of everything that it trains off of. So there's some privacy concerns, copyright concerns, all sorts of different things, which now that we hit the top of the hour, it could be a whole other conversation. But you do want to look into that and think carefully about some of the ethical considerations and legal considerations about that. And also just check to see if your company, what is their policy on that. And there are ways to work around that, but just something to think about. Well, thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Please be in touch. I hope you have a great ethics week. And if you're doing any of this or want help with any of this, please reach out. We would love to engage with you more on this because I think it's an important topic. Thank you. Thanks, Taylor, Melissa, everyone for commenting. I really appreciate it. Deborah and Brendan and Caroline, Gina, thank you. Bye, everyone.